Last year, a group of military veterans checked into a clinic in the southern United States. The veterans were all suffering from a loss of purpose. They felt no direction in their lives. They felt like they had no inner compass, no real reason to get up in the morning. To help themselves, the veterans had tried all sorts of things, including mindfulness and meditation, but none of it had worked. And so now the veterans had come to the clinic to try a new technique, journaling, in which they wrote down their memories and emotions as a way of processing them. The veterans were extremely skeptical that the journaling would work, and it didn't. It had no effect, except for one veteran. In his journal, he wrote down a story about his life. And that story had a transformative effect, reigniting his sense of purpose. Amazed and feeling that they were on the verge of a tremendous breakthrough, the staff at the clinic took that story and they gave it to all the other veterans. But it had no effect. And so then the staff at the clinic studied that story as closely as they could, and they saw nothing obviously special about it. And that is when they called me. I'm a professor at Ohio State's Project Narrative, the world's leading academic institute for the study of story, and my specialty is how stories work in the brain. And when I heard this remarkable story about how the veteran had changed himself through his own story, I was naturally very curious to learn more about it. So we took it back to my story science lab to see if we could crack the mystery of how the veteran's story worked, and to see if we could get a little bit more of that work for other people. So to crack the mystery, let's start by tracing the veteran's loss of purpose back to its original psychological source, and that source is dissociation. Dissociation means a disconnection or separation. It's when you disconnect from painful memories in your past to focus neutrally on the present. Dissociation is a completely healthy, short-term coping mechanism for dealing with painful emotions like grief and shame. But in the case of the veterans, it had become chronic and long-term and unhealthy. And so they were essentially living almost entirely in the present. And while this had the effect of separating them from the negative memories of their past, it was also separating them from their future, depriving them of developing a long-term sense of purpose. So they were just going day to day, moment by moment. This chronic dissociation is why mindfulness and meditation had not worked for the veterans. Mindfulness and meditations are techniques that work by interrupting negative thoughts, and so they in fact work by producing dissociation. So they're actually adding to the veteran's underlying condition instead of alleviating it. So what was different about the veteran's story? How did it reverse dissociation? What was special about it? When we took it back to my lab, what we saw is it had one significant narrative ingredient, and that was a positive surprise, or in other words, a plot twist. Something unexpectedly good had happened to the veteran over the course of his life. And that matters because plot twists do something very specific to our brain. They cause wonder. And wonder is a really remarkable emotion. Wonder is the emotion you feel if you undergo a religious conversion or other kind of spiritual experience. It's the feeling of being born again. Now, if you feel wonder in the course of reading a novel or a film, that can have a transitory uplift effect on you. But if you experience wonder from a plot twist in your own history, it can have a radical transformative effect, and that's because it can change the most important story in your brain. That story is the story that you tell yourself about yourself. That story connects your past to your present, to your future, giving you an overall sense of direction. And there are many, many healthy versions of this story. There's no one right way to have a life narrative, but when we see people who have a strong sense of purpose, they tend to have one core characteristic, and that is connecting negative events in their past to positive events in their present. And what that does is that allows them to integrate hard experiences like grief and shame into an overall sense of momentum. So it works the opposite of dissociating. Instead of separating from those negative events in your past, you're connecting with them in order to leverage them into an overall sense of momentum. And that is what the veteran's plot twist did. It generated wonder out of grief and shame, providing him with a sense of ongoing mission. So you're probably wondering, what was that plot twist? What was that story that had this remarkable transformative effect on the veteran's life? Well, it wouldn't do any good for me to tell you. Remember how it didn't do any good for those other veterans to hear the story? And that's because other people's positive surprises have no real effect on the story in your brain. If you go to see a motivational speaker, or you read a self-help biography, or you go to watch a feel-good movie, that's probably not going to have any lasting impact on your sense of purpose. And in fact, it might actually contribute to dissociation by making you feel that in order to get over the hard things in your life, you've got to pretend like your life is somebody else's. What does have a lasting effect is doing what that veteran did and reviewing your own life history for positive surprises, times when life surprised you or you surprised yourself. Now, sometimes those surprises are big and dramatic, like being rescued from danger by a stranger. But most of the time, they're ordinary experiences, just like making a new friend or realizing that you could do something that you didn't think that you could. When you locate one of those memories, the key is to lean into the feeling of surprise. It's the surprise that generates the wonder, and it's the wonder that connects your past to your present, integrating your life. Now, a lot of times I get asked by people, why does my brain work this way? Why do I have to remember things consciously that already happened to me? Why do I have to integrate events into my life narrative that are already part of my life? The answer has to do with your emotions. Your negative emotions like grief and shame are much stronger than your positive emotions like wonder. And that's because your negative emotions are there for self-protection. And your brain values its safety more than anything, including purpose. That's why you can go through a fight, a struggle in your life, a hard time in your life, and you can fight like a champion, and you can come out the other side and still feel lost, like those veterans. Because what held you together during that fight was your self-preservation, was those negative feelings. But if you didn't focus on positive surprises, you get out on the other side and you feel like you're in a story that's taken you nowhere. Now, you don't have to feel that strong sense of directionlessness to benefit from revisiting your own life story. My team, we've worked with thousands of individuals, many of them suffering from everyday experiences of grief, shame, or burnout that are contributing to a loss of purpose. And if you ever feel that loss in your life, just follow the veteran's path and revisit your own memory for positive surprises. If you're feeling grief, look for a time when life surprised you. For example, with the beauty of nature or music. If you feel shame, look for a time when you surprised yourself by facing a fear or taking a risk. If you feel burnout, look for a time when somebody else positively surprised you. Maybe by giving you a perfect gift or apologizing when you thought that they never would. And when you identify that memory, recall every little detail that you can, making it as vivid as possible in your mind. And when you're recalling those details, you don't need to just focus on the good parts, ignoring or discounting the bad, because that's taking you back down the road to dissociation. For your brain to feel a sense of purpose, it's not important for it to think that there's no bad in you or the world. It just has to believe that there's some good. Because here's the real secret. The more bad there is in you or the world, the bigger the surprise that comes from the good. And the bigger the surprise, the more that its wonder can connect the hard days of your past to the positive days of your future, giving you purpose now. Thank you.